Welcome to the Low Carb USA podcast, where we seek to inspire you to help us build this community. I'm Doug Reynolds.
And this is Pam Devine.
Diana Rodgers, it's a huge pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us. I think I do this with most people that I end up interviewing on a podcast, is to find out their backstory, where they came from, and how they ended up in this space. So maybe let's start with that, and then we can start talking about some of the cool projects that you've got going.
Sure. So as a kid, I was an undiagnosed celiac until I was 26. So I was always hungry, always, like, at any time would have eaten a full Thanksgiving meal if someone had put it in front of me. Very underweight, low muscle tone, some weird neurological things with reading and everything. And all of my issues kind of mostly went away when I went gluten-free. So I was diagnosed when I was 26. But when I went to the dietitian, she just gave me a bunch of coupons for, like, gluten-free ultra-processed foods. And so I really just went from, like, what I thought was a healthy, low-fat, standard American diet to the gluten-free version of that. So it was, toast, no butter in the morning, a sandwich for lunch, maybe pasta for dinner, maybe a cookie and a gluten-free beer. Like that was what I was eating. And I also had gone to so many doctors because I knew that these feelings that I had in between meals, like if I had skipped a meal, or even if I had gone like more than like 2.5, 3 hours, I would get like tunnel vision and really shaky. And I knew that that wasn't right, but I kept not testing positive for diabetes. And I just knew something was wrong. And so I always had my gluten-free snacks on me all the time. And so my health story, kind of evolved where I ended up having to really go keto to fix everything. And it was when I read Robb Wolf's book, The Paleo Solution. And I don't really love sweet potatoes, so I did kind of just a low carb version of the paleo diet that he had in his book, which is already kind of low carb, but I just like took out the sweet potatoes. I don't like them. And everything was fixed. Like I went from like black and white to color. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I could go from breakfast to lunch without a snack, or even miss lunch and not feel like all the emergency buttons were going off. And it was just so liberating that, I didn't have to obsess about what I was going to eat for dinner all day long. I mean, I thought about food all the time. And now dinner is just whatever meat I have thawed from the freezer and whatever vegetable. And like, I have no cravings in a good way. Food is just food, and it doesn't control me anymore. So I changed my career and became a registered dietitian later in my life. And I'm so glad I went through it. It was really hard. It took me a long time to do it, about 7 years. Because I was doing it part-time and raising little kids at the time. And now I have a private practice, and I've written a few books, and just have this movie that we'll talk about. But I'm really glad I went through all the pain of everything, because now I can help people. I mostly focus on GI and blood sugar issues with people. And coincidentally, most people that come to me looking for weight loss also have GI issues and blood sugar problems. And so when I fix them, I'm fixing the whole family. I'm fixing everything that's going wrong with them. And it's really rewarding for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I hear that all the time. And Pam, in our house, is a prime example. I mean, she was a terrorist in the morning if she didn't eat when she got up, and then again by 10 o'clock. I just stay out of her way, Mm-hmm. And this, like, within a week, it was like all of that was gone. And we generally eat once a day. Sometimes we'll eat something in the middle of the day. Most of the time it's because we need a break from our desks and from working. But there's just so many people that And for me, so many other issues that I wasn't expecting to be addressed by this have been addressed. And it's just, I think Amy Berger, when she did a talk at our conference back in August, and she was saying, like, people think we kooks because, like, everything they start telling you about some problem that they've got, and you say try keto, like no matter what it is, like try keto, they think you've gone mad. And yet the thing is that it's free, and it's so easy to try, and you see the results so quickly, or at least movements in the right direction so quickly that it's, try it and see what the hell, maybe it'll help you.
Yeah. And for me, I was never overweight. I think because I had all these malabsorption issues. And so for me, it was just how I was feeling. It wasn't even like I looked totally healthy.
Right.
And so I'm not 100% keto, and I do kind of this like higher protein type version of a low carb diet for most people. I've just found for the folks I work with, it tends to be a little more satiating for them. But it's amazing. And it's amazing the resistance that people have to this because, carbs are just really yummy.
Yeah, exactly. So we've started an organization, a nonprofit, just back in the middle of December that we actually launched it, called the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, SMHP. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it yet, but one of the committees that we have on there is one for dietitians. So, I really feel like we need to get you involved in that as well, because I think you can bring a lot to the table with that committee and helping us to formulate how because really what it's about is developing education and stuff by dietitians, for dietitians, other dietitians, to teach them about it, and to teach other people about the role of the dietitian in this whole program.
Yeah, that would be really great. I'm actually getting more into courses myself and making courses.
Right.
I have a meat masterclass course on nutrition, environment, and ethics of eating meat. I have a lot. Most of the people that follow me are women who are pretty conflicted about eating meat, but a lot of them have kids and they want to make sure their kids get the right nutrition. People are really, worried about how meat is produced, and is it going to kill them, or is it going to, is it torturing animals, all these things. And so I do my best to try to make people learn how to better source their meat, but also just understand the science behind why meat actually doesn't cause cancer, why it's an important food. I mean, we've got a really big movement of this plant-based community that is making a lot of money based on these fear tactics and this greenwashing, especially Oatly with their greenwashing. And so there's not many people pushing back against that, especially with medical credentials.
Right. So I think that's kind of a good segue into what we mainly wanted to talk about here, and that's the sacred cow, right? It's like sitting there behind you. So you've written a book, which apparently is like a lot, because so we're going to talk about the movie, but you've written that book, which goes into a whole lot more detail and really delves into the science and that behind a lot of what you talked about in the movie. But tell us about the movie, because I mean, I've seen it. It's brilliant, and I'd love people to hear about. Tell us about the project and about why you made it and what you hope to get that it achieves.
Yeah. So, the backstory is I've always been interested in agriculture and just being outside and working with my hands. And as my summer job in high school and college, I worked on a farm just for money as my job, and just loved every part of it. And ended up spending the last 18 years of my life living on a working organic farm that we were trying to be as closed loop as possible within to be as sustainable as possible. And animals are a really important component of growing organic vegetables. And so you absolutely have to have their manure, their blood, their bones. Like, you need all of that to feed the soil. And so as I was learning more about real food nutrition, it became apparent that real farming, and looking back to how our ants, the hunter-gatherer type way of the movement of animals and all of that, it really is an important piece to understanding, also how people should be eating and farming. So I was pestering Robb Wolf for a long time to write this book with me, and because he's also pretty passionate about this, and we've been talking about it ever since we met like 10 years ago. And he was feeling like it wasn't the right time. People weren't really that interested in sustainability issues. We were doing talks like at PaleoFX in the first year. I think we did AHS too. We had like 3 people in the room. But then it grew and grew and grew, and the interest got stronger, and and to the point where now people were crowding the room, and there wasn't enough seats for everybody. So I think people, once they fix themselves, are really interested in then, well, what can I do on a bigger levels, whether that's becoming a nutritionist or a coach, or learning more about policy, things like that. And so I wanted to write this book, tackling nutrition, environment, and ethics. And so those are the 3 main reasons why people are anti-meat. And that's why meat is worse than butter back in, fat back in the 80s and 90s, because not only are you harming your health, but you're also killing beautiful animals, and cow farts are destroying the environment, right? So it's this like trifecta of evil that cows represent. And so the beginning of the book actually talks about why meat is such a powerful food and such a polarizing food. So it kind of goes a little bit into like cultural anthropology, looking at meat as the powerhouse that it is and what it represents, wealth, blood, death, masculinity. I mean, it's a really strong symbol in our culture of a lot of things. And our disconnection with nature and death definitely plays into a lot of the anti-meat bias, but there's also a religious component to that. I worked a lot with Gary and Belinda Feck about the religious components going into the anti-meat movement in the West. So the Seventh-day Adventists and their anti-meat crusade, and Kellogg's cornflakes coming out of that, grape nuts and things like that. But then, going into nutrition, there really, there was a need to explain why nutrition research is so flawed, why meat doesn't cause cancer, and the importance of protein for our health, and the importance of maybe even eating more protein than the RDA. I looked into the origins of the RDA of protein, and it's based on pretty crappy science. But then, of course, the biggest piece is the environmental piece, where I talk about land use and water use, feed use, and how even typical beef is overly vilified. And so halfway through making this book, yet another vegan documentary came out, and I realized this has to be a film. If these guys keep on churning out these films and we have nothing to be a counterpoint to it, it's going to be bad. Like, how many people are really going to buy that book? How many young people, right? And sit down and read it and follow the citations. And so I put the book on hold for a little bit and did a crowdfunder, raised some money, got started with a film, got more people on board, did a lot of traveling and a lot of interviews, and finally launched the film just a few months ago.
Yeah, it's a really cool film. And like you said, the book, now you finish the book and the book goes into, I think sometimes, like when you read the book after a movie, it's like, or you see the movie after a book, I think is when it's long, like the book was so much better. But I think in this case, probably a really good idea to watch the movie first, and then go and read the book and take a deeper dive into it.
Yeah, so the movie is totally different than the book. It was too hard to cover everything in the
Mm,
movie, and so we really focused on the environmental case against meat. And we couldn't even really address all of the things that I talk about in the book, but we really wanted to give people a just a basic overview of why biodiversity is so important and why grazing animals are so critical for grasslands and land recovery. And so we take people to different farms. We go to Chihuahua, Mexico. We go to Virginia. We spent some time with a butcher in Belgium, and really just hearing people's stories. We do touch on nutrition and ethics a little bit in the film, but it's much deeper in the book.
yeah. I think it was Paleo FX back in 2017 or something. We actually had a booth there trying to, tell people about our new organization and that they should maybe come to one of our conferences. But there was a lady, I forget her name now, but she was literally in the booth opposite us on the other side of the aisle, and it was all about the sustainable farming with and like Alan Savory was
Mhm.
like their big hero. And I had never, I mean, he comes from the same place that I do, and I had never even heard of him. And so I went and looked him up and everything, and like devoured all this information about him, what he's been doing in recovering lands from pretty much desert to green fields and flowing rivers and stuff, just by grazing livestock on those, and driving livestock through there like the normal herds would have traveled through there in the old days. It's just the most amazing thing.
Yeah, his TED Talk really blew me away. Joel Salatin, one of the farmers in my film, actually sent it to me, and I forwarded it immediately to Robb, and both of us just started talking about how, like, oh my God, we've both got Robb and I both got very involved with Savory Institute for a while too. I'm on their advisory board.
Right.
And really support all the work they're doing, educating farmers. And I think the story of Alan Savory is really interesting because he was not always on this side. He started thinking, originally thinking that elephants were actually harming the environment. We needed less of them, which is probably the natural thought process for most people that are in conservation. And he realized it was the exact opposite, that we actually need more grazing animals in order to keep these lands healthy. And it's counterintuitive, but that is the solution.
Yeah, it's amazing. So you mentioned cow farts. So let's
Yeah.
progress onto that now.
Okay.
As I know, in fact, the reason I think I reached out to you was you were like freaking out about people talking about this, and it freaks me out too. So I think you could probably much more eloquently explain why this is a lot of rubbish.
Yes. And why I think people in the low carb space really do need to pay attention to this, because the nutrition argument is pretty easy to win. You can just, pull up the nutrient density of meat versus plant-based anything,
Yeah.
and meat wins, right? It's really
Correct.
easy. I mean, seafood is even more nutrient dense than red meat. Red meat is more nutrient dense than chicken. It's easy. It's just numbers. But then getting into the environmental piece, you really have to understand that the research, just like nutrition research, is being misinterpreted, and it's based on very bad methodology. So when it comes to the greenhouse gases, there's biogenic cycles of methane, which is what cattle are part of. And then there's the one-way flow of fossil fuels. So if you were to picture one of those like ecospheres, those like glass ecospheres where there's a little like living or, ecosystem inside. So the methane that the cattle are producing, or the greenhouse gases, because it's not just methane, are just recycling molecules that are already part of the environment. So they're eating grass, which is carbon. They take it in, the rumen, the bacteria then emit methane as a byproduct of breaking down the grass. And the methane goes into the atmosphere for about 10 years, and then it breaks into H2O, water, and CO2, carbon dioxide, which is then taken in by the plants, and in photosynthesis, the O2 is released, oxygen, which is what we breathe. And then the carbon makes up the grass, the roots, it feeds the soil bacteria. Up to 40% of it actually gets sequestered in the soil, and then the cow eats it again. So it's not generating brand new greenhouse gases. And we don't have more farting, grazing animals today in North America than we did in the 1600s before we got rid of bison. Like, we don't have a net, we have more cows, but we have the same number of belching animals. And it's really belches, not cow farts, that are what everyone is complaining about. But when you compare that to fossil fuels, so that would be like me taking a straw and blowing greenhouse gases into this atmosphere, right? Because when we extract fossil fuels, we're taking ancient dead organisms, which is what fossil fuels are, and releasing their gases into the atmosphere as a brand new molecules, right? So there's no balance to that equation. It's entering new. So you really can't compare methane from cattle to fossil fuels. But even if you did, transportation, energy production, and just consumerism in general, those are the big problems. Farting cows or belching cows worldwide only make up 5% of the man-made greenhouse gas emissions. In the US, it's about 2.6%. And even if we got rid of all animal food consumption in America, all the livestock, our emissions would only go down about 2%, but our calories would go way up, our carbohydrate intake would go up, and our nutrient deficiencies would go up. So they've done studies modeling what would happen. So when you look at the contribution that meat makes to our health, telling people to eat less meat only leads to more diabetes, in my opinion. And in the book, I actually even looked at the greenhouse gases. Mark Cucuzella, I'm not sure if I'm saying
Cucuzella, yeah.
Cucuzella and I, one time at a conference, were talking about what are the greenhouse gases associated with diabetes, right? With like dialysis and amputations. And they have done some numbers on that stuff. And, that needs to be considered. If we're really going to look at everything with cattle, we need to look at the processed food industry and all of the ramifications with greenhouse gases as people get sick and have to have amputations and go on dialysis from diabetes.
Yeah. And I mean, even though it's already cyclic, right? So it's a part of a natural cycle. The cow fart, belches, whatever you want to call it. But now you're introducing all this external stuff, as you talked about, developed from fossil fuels. And it's not just that, it's like just industry in itself, everything the smoke and the other gases and stuff that it introduces, and what the cars introduce into. I mean, one car, me driving to work, I don't drive to work anymore these days, but a half hour there, sometimes an hour in traffic and back, just my car is going to emit so much more than a number of cows probably in their lifetime. It's like the comparison is just ridiculous.
Right, but because there's other environmental claims against cattle too, right? They drink too much water, which I talk about in the book. So they're not just expanding blimps, like the water is part of a water cycle too. They urinate. And actually most of the water that's attributed to beef is actually water that's already in the grass or rainfall. So there's different types of water methodology. There's green water and blue water. So the blue water would be what the cows are drinking, water that we can drink. And then there's green water, which is the natural water that's happening as part of the water cycle, like out in the environment. 97% of the water footprint of grass-fed beef is green water, and 94% of even feedlot finished beef is green water. So they're not competing with us for drinking water.
Yeah, and yeah, and it's just like these guys with second agendas that are just manipulate. I mean, we see that in this whole nutrition space, right?
Mm-hmm.
They just manipulate the numbers to
Fit the narrative.
to suit their narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned feedlots. So we already know that this sustainable farming and is so good for the environment and can help bring back pastures and deserts back to pastures and all that kind of stuff. And eventually it would be brilliant if all the meat was grass-fed and, in the sustainable farming scenario. But it's not like that right now. And so one of the things is that, and because of that, it's generally a lot more expensive than the grain finished stuff that you can get. And I'm an example. I can't afford grass-fed beef. We look for all the manager specials and stuff, and I go to Stater Brothers and these other places, and I buy ribeye steaks for $3.99 a pound.
Mm-hmm.
But that is not grass-fed beef, right?
Well,
One of the things that I just, whenever Peter Ballister talks about it at our conferences, I always come up during the Q&A and say, there's just something I just like to bring up, that it doesn't have to be grass-fed for you to be able to do keto or go low carb and help reverse your diabetes or whatever. You know what? If you can afford it and you can help support this project and this idea to try and make everything grass-fed, that's brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can't, don't ever tell me, and especially don't let me hear that you ever tell someone else that they can't do keto because they're not eating grass-fed beef. So I'd like to hear your opinion just on that, and we can talk more about it.
So I get in fights with both camps about my opinions, with both the feedlot finished community and with the grass-fed community, because as a health practitioner first, meat is a healthy food. And actually, I did a systematic review of all the literature comparing feedlot finished beef to grass-fed beef. And there really is not a significant health difference between feedlot finished beef and grass finished beef. This has to do with, and maybe Peter has covered this a little bit in the conferences, but the way they're digesting the food, the bacteria is really digesting the food and almost translating it into fatty acids. So that's what the cow is really living on. But even before that, all cows are grass-fed. If they're finished on a feedlot, it's only about the last 3 months of their life. And so they're still amazing animal. 85% of the beef cattle that we have right now in this country is grazing on land that we can't crop. So they start at a calf cow, place in Montana or Colorado, and then they're finished on feedlots. But even when they're at the feedlot, their entire diet is not grain. It's a mixture of a lot of actually byproducts from the plant-based protein industry, like the hulls from the peas, from the pea protein. Cows can eat that. We can't do anything else with that in our food system. And so they can actually upcycle nutrient poor food into the best food for humans. And so they're actually a net win for our food system, and they can be grazed in a great way even before they're finished on feedlots. And not all feedlots are evil places too. I've been to some smaller feedlots that are actually fine, that cows are hanging out, they're just eating some concentrates, and it's much more economical for the farmers to do it that way. And that has to do with our grain subsidies and different policies that we have, which are kind of crazy. And in other countries, the grass-fed stuff is cheaper because grain's expensive, and it should be expensive. It should be cheaper to eat grass-fed beef. But also speaking on, the expense piece, I did do a blog post where I compared organic grass-fed beef to many different products at Walmart. So you can buy organic grass-fed beef at Walmart. And I looked at that per pound, and I found, 10 other items that are more expensive per pound than organic grass-fed beef. One is strawberries, just conventional strawberries per pound are more expensive than grass-fed beef. Milano cookies, Snickers, wine, potato chips, and then a bunch of plant-based foods too, including Beyond Burgers, which are twice as expensive as organic grass-fed beef per pound, but they sell them in half-pound packages, and it's half-pound of product, but then they sell it in this big package, so that it sort of deceives you and makes you think that it's so much more.
Yeah.
Where beef, the meat industry has to get better with their, it shouldn't be commodities, and it shouldn't be packaged in the plant-based guys do have a leg up on their marketing. A cube of organic grass-fed beef is just sort of sold in this like cube thing, compared to Beyond Burger, which is in this nice tray, and, it's extra packaging, but it's effective at what they're doing.
Yeah. This is we could talk here all day. It's such a huge conversation, and maybe we'll get you on. We may talk about it offline, and maybe come up with like particular like topics or something, and just focus on that, and do a couple more of these where we don't like look at something from a global level, but just dive into a couple of things. That would be fun.
Yeah, because it's a game of whack-a-mole largely. Like you start talking about the greenhouse gases, and then, but it's about the water. So then you start talking about the water, but then it's meat is murder. So then you start talking about, well, is it ethical because you don't like meat to then tell everybody else that they can't eat meat? Is that the most ethical thing, especially to low-income populations? Like, I've got a big problem with Meatless Monday because 70% of New York City public school kids are either low income or homeless. And we've got Meatless Mondays, which is based on zero evidence. Yeah. There's no evidence that shows pulling meat away from children is going to be beneficial health-wise or for the environment. And actually, there's only been one RCT done on meat versus less meat. And it was on children in Kenya who were food insecure. And one group got extra meat in a snack, one group got extra calories, and one group got extra dairy. And the meat group outperformed behaviorally, academically, and physically. And interestingly, the next group was the overcalorie group, not the milk group. And I think that's just important to know because all over Africa, they're supplementing with milk because it's cheaper than meat for the school lunches. And they think that this is, we're doing great for our kids because we're investing in all this milk. But milk blocks iron absorption, which is what these kids need in order to grow. Right. And so I've been trying to work, there's a few ins I have with different governments over in Africa where I'm trying to, point this out. It's the wrong thing to be doing. Yeah.
Well, the Noakes Foundation in South Africa has this Eat Better South Africa program. And that's, it's not talking specifically about milk, but the big thing for them is that their staple diet is mealie meal or pap, as they call it, which is like an even finer version of grits, ground corn. And you could tell them to go low carb, and it's like, okay, but that's all I eat, maybe with some gravy on it sometimes. Mm-hmm. So to try and teach them that there are alternatives. And one of the things they did was make a meal type thing out of coconut flour and almond flour that they were able to sell at a competitive price. And taking these like pilot communities where they can envelop the whole community and feed them and monitor them medically and all of that, and have had tremendous success with that. And then, now you've got a pilot that shows the thing and you can build out from that. So yeah.
There's one similar that happened in Burkina Faso with eggs. They were teaching, even people who had chickens were selling the eggs because, anyways, they taught the mom, they they worked with the elders of the community and taught the parents the benefits of giving 1 egg a day to their kids. And the biggest benefit the parents remarked on was their behavior, their improvement in their behavior. But it was a hugely successful program.
Okay, yeah, no, that's super cool. I think it's looking like the time, yeah. So maybe we can put a stop in it here. Hopefully we can get you back, like I said, and talk about some very specific, gets very specific on some topics down the road. But your book and the movie, how do people find it, find out about, give contact details, whatever you would like people to know about you and your project?
Sure. The website for the book and film is sacredcow.info. And I have a bunch of really cool infographics there, which actually take one individual topic and explains the science behind it in a graphic way. So my first degree is in art. And so they're really, really effective. And I use a lot of these on my Instagram channel. So that's at Sustainable Dish. And folks can follow me there. It's largely a food politics feed. And then my nutrition website is sustainabledish.com. And I work individual with people and have courses and things like that.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, thank you so much for being with us. I mentioned Peter Ballestedt at our conferences. We've never had you at one of our conferences, and that's all on me. But we were talking before we got started here, and we definitely going to have you. Well, not definitely, but hopefully you're available to be with us at the end of August at our San Diego event, whether that's virtual or in person. And I look forward to further conversations with you, and also put you in touch with Adele Height and the others that are involved at the.
Oh, I'm friends with Adele.
Dietitians. She's kind of the head of that committee. Like, she's the chair of that committee.
She was very generous and actually proofed my nutrition section of my book for me just to make sure I had it all right. So.
Excellent. Yeah, no, she's been fabulous in helping us develop the clinical guidelines and all of that stuff. So, yeah, I think you would be an awesome addition to that group of dietitians that are trying to get this message out to the population that's been so ill-informed.
Yeah, it's harder on the nutrition side. I do have a positive piece to mention about the sustainable agriculture side, and that is that there's a chief of staff of a senator actually reached out to me and wants to form a new committee under this new Biden administration to get more regenerative grazing on public land. And I was invited to be on the committee to help get that going. And it was because of the film and the book. So that's
brilliant. I mean, if that's all it achieved right there, it was worthwhile.
I think it's going to be a lot easier to win conservation grazing than it will be to get dietitians to say meat is healthy. Unfortunately, I think that's a lot harder.
Yeah, but the ones that are in this space now are ones that understand that.
Yeah.
And so that's part of what we're working with the group is on presentations and education to reach out to those other ones and some insights into what might be effective in trying to reach them. We can't not try.
I get rejected every year from my applications at Fancy. It would be fabulous to be able to present there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we could, and maybe as a united group under the umbrella of a nonprofit organization like the SMHP, maybe that'll be a way to get a foot in the door.
Cool. We'll see. Maybe. Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks. You've been listening to an episode of the Low Carb USA podcast. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/lowcarbusa.